Welcome, everybody. Well, let me just introduce our speaker, our lecturer tonight. Actually, he doesn't need introduction lah. Rabbi Anthony Loke is an independent researcher, scholar, author, preacher, well, so many hats, lecturer, and once upon a time in the pastoral ministry. We are so privileged to have him teach us because he is a very, very, very busy person. Okay, so Reverend Dr. Loke, over to you. Thank you for being here.
Okay, let me switch. Okay, thank you, Lily, for the invitation. I think as she says, most of you probably know me by now. It's been a joy always coming to teach physically, but because of MCO this year, it's the first time that we had to do it through Zoom. Okay, but already been preaching on Zoom a few times and pre-recorded video. And so we're going to look at the book of Revelation, and we have 2 weekends, so that will give us an idea of what we can do. So we only have about an hour plus to talk, and then we will have Q&A at the end of it. So basically it is maybe I'll talk about maybe 1 hour 10 minutes like that, and then give the rest of the time to Q&A. So we have 2 sessions tonight, where we will have a very general overview in an introduction to the book. And then when we come back again 2 weeks from now on the 21st, then I will talk about the book. Here, what we'll do is we'll look at how we can interpret a book like Revelation. And there are 4 main ways, 4 standard ways. So I'll go, this is how the book will be interpreted. Okay, so we will then look at how what we can do with a book like Revelation. So today is basically just a very simple bird's eye view, and so I will talk a little bit about who is the author, who are the recipients of the letter like this, what is the purpose, and then we look at an outline of the book, and then we ask a question like, what are we reading? What type of genre are we reading from this book? And then I'll look at some key messages, what the book is actually trying to tell us. And then you can see, if you look at it that way, then we will probably not do like what many people today do. They think of Revelation as a book about end times, only relevant to our time now. Now, if that's the case, then what about all those people who lived 2,000 years ago? Everyone reading the same book, and everybody thought the book applies to them. Were they all wrong? So people like, let's say, Martin Luther in the 15th century, the great reformer, he read the book and he thought that, in that book, he refers to the Pope as the Antichrist. Vatican was Babylon. And so was he right? Because, well, obviously the end didn't come in his time. So what makes us think that we are the generation that will see all this and we are right when we interpret? So I think once you understand what we are reading, that will help us to see what we can do with a book like this. So we have 2 parts. So for tonight, we will do a bird's eye view first. As someone says, it's like flying up in the sky and looking down as a bird and trying to get a bird's eye view. Or if you take a camera, you get a fish eye view. You see everything in one scoop, and then you can see how the book has a certain shape. There's a certain purpose. Someone wrote it from a certain place to people at a certain place, and you will try to discern the purposes. And then we will introduce you to some of the characters in the book. What makes the book so difficult is the book uses so many imageries, and they are not the usual ones that we find elsewhere in the Bible. And there are many of these imageries which are new, used only for the first time. So how do we interpret some of those characters? And why that fascination with numbers? Because in the book, it's not just 666. which is the most famous figure in the Revelation. But we also have the 144,000. We also have the 12, the 24, the 4. All these are numbers that keeps popping up. 7 bowls of wrath, 7 trumpets, 7 plates. Okay, so 7 is again a number that pops out. And then we look at the Jesus that we read in this book. It is such a different Jesus from the one that we read in the Gospels. Okay. And then I'll end with just a short, brief idea of what the book is actually trying to tell us, so that we can see every generation can perhaps apply the message of the book in their time. Not necessarily we have to wait till end times and then only then the book of Revelation comes through. I think in every age, the book speaks afresh. So in our time, 21st century, the book still speaks to us, just as it spoke to people 100 years ago, as it spoke to people like Martin Luther, as it spoke to the early church fathers, as it spoke to the Christians of John's time as he wrote that book. So we will look at bird's eye view, some of the key major characters, and then finally some key messages in the book. So let's begin with a glance first. There are 22 chapters in Revelation. The beginning chapter and the last chapter is the prologue and the epilogue. Okay, the prologue is basically the introduction, and it starts off with the pattern of a letter. Okay, we see that it is actually a letter that is sent, and then in chapter 2 to 3, you find that there are 7 short letters attached to the book. Okay, and these 7 churches are all found in Asia Minor. Asia Minor is the term to describe modern day Turkey. Okay, so at that time, the country wasn't called Turkey. It was Asia Minor, small Asia. Okay, and so there are 7 churches there, and these 7 letters are incorporated in chapter 2 to 3. Each letter has a standard pattern. To the angel of this church, the words of this person, Christ, and then commendation, criticisms, and then rewards and promises. So the standard pattern in each of the letter. Then when we come to 4 and 5, and that's where John is taken up to heaven and he sees a vision of heaven. So 4 and 5 are joined together, something which you can read as 2 chapters of the same thing. And then the long one, 6 to 20, that is the main body of the letter, and basically it's about judgment. Okay, visions of judgment that comes in cycles. Okay, all the 7 pops up. Okay, so you have all those numerical 7 trumpets, 7 bowls, 7 seals, and all these things. Then the penultimate chapter is 21, and that is the vision of the new heaven and the new earth. Okay, John says, I see the new heavens and the new earth, a new Jerusalem, descending down upon earth. Okay, and then chapter 22 is the last part, the ending of the book, and it ends just like a normal letter with the greetings, with the warnings, and then with the blessing, the grace of the Lord Jesus be with all the saints. So it's quite long, 22 chapters, longer than most of the epistles. And so you have a beginning chapter, ending chapter. You have, after that, the beginning chapter is actually the beginning of a long letter. And then there are 7 short letters that comes after chapter 1. And then 2 chapters about the vision of heaven, when John is taken up into heaven. And then 6 to 20 are that cycles of 7 trumpets, 7 seals, 7 bowls of wrath. And then the penultimate chapter 21 is that vision of the new heaven, the new earth. And here you find almost a lot of similarities with what we find in Ezekiel chapter 40 to 48, where Ezekiel also has a vision of a new temple, and he's also asked to measure. And here you find that there is also almost similar mention like this. And then the final chapter is the ending. So that is a quick glance of what we are getting ourselves into as we read a book like Revelation. If you would look at it this way, you can actually perhaps it's an easier way to see. So beginning part is the prologue. There are 20 verses in chapter 1, the prologue. The epilogue is the last part, where again John sums up and ends just like a letter. Immediately after chapter 1, you have 2 chapters which are 7 short letters to 7 churches in Asia Minor. 2 chapters where John sees what is happening in heaven. And then here you have that long thing, okay? That long sequence. The difficulty with this part is how do we see these 7s? Are they to be seen like consequential events one after another, or do we read them as actually the same event, but we look at it a few rounds together? Okay, so whether the 7 actually are they parallel to each other? Okay, do we treat them as actually altogether almost 28 signs, or do we treat them as actually only 7? But they're repeated again in a cycle, in a cycle, in a cycle. And that's where the difficulty is, because how we interpret the book, do we stretch them all out and they refer to 28 things, or are we talking about only just 7 things 4 times long? See, so that we will come to look at it. And then you have that vision of the new heaven and new earth, and then finally the epilogue. Okay, so this perhaps will be an easier way to see the book and have an idea of what we are reading. Okay, so the easiest part to read, of course, are the letters. And my ex-colleague, Dr. Lin, will come in July, and he will focus on these 7 churches more in depth. So I will just give a very cursory coverage at this time. Okay. So this is an overview. So keep in mind, it has a certain pattern. Okay, the main bulk of everything is all in the middle, from 6 all the way to 20. That is the main message of what is going to happen. So it is the future. The problem is how future is the future, because a future can still be future if it's just a few years down the road. So is it John's immediate future, what he's seeing, or is it a future that stretches into 1,000 years into the future, the first millennium? Or is it a future that concerns us? We are living in the 2nd millennium. Or is it still about things not yet happened and in a distant future? So that is a tricky part. How do we interpret the future? And we will look at those 2 words where Jesus often used. Behold, I'm coming soon. Now, what does soon means? And then he talks about the time is near. Well, it's already been 2,000 years and Jesus has not yet returned. So how near is near? How soon is soon? Okay, so we will have to look at these 2 terms. Okay, so let's look at first the author. The traditional view is it is John the Apostle, one of the 12 disciples of Jesus. So the traditional view is that John, when he was selected by Jesus, was a young man, the youngest in the group. Okay, and tradition always placed him as the youngest. Even if you look at, let's say, the painting by Michelangelo, you see that John is painted as a young man. Okay, so most people think that he was very young, and so he lived to a ripe old age. Okay, perhaps maybe until about the 90s. So he was able to write this book of Revelation in his old age. And as we read the letter of Revelation, chapter 1 tells us he is in exile in an island called Patmos. I will show a map afterwards. So we therefore think that this author is John the Apostle, the one who also wrote the Gospel of John, and the one who also wrote the epistles of John, 1 John, 2 John, 3 John. The traditional view is that it's the same John who wrote the Gospel, the same John who wrote the epistles, 1, 2, 3 John, and the same John who wrote Revelation. That is a traditional view. Okay, so the traditional view has been quite prevalent for a long time. But today you find that there are scholars who challenge this view. I think the reason why they challenge is there are many Johns in the Bible. Okay, it's a very common name, Yohanan. Yohanan is a very common name, John. So how do we know it is the same John the Apostle? Because when you read his letters, the epistles of John, 3rd John especially, 3rd John, you find that he doesn't call himself John. 2nd and 3rd John, you find that he uses the name the elder. Okay. The elder to the elect lady, 2nd John, the elder to the beloved Gaius, 3rd John. So scholars think that this John the elder, that's all he used. He doesn't use his personal name, so this is missing. He's only called the elder and writing this. So who is this John the elder? Is it a different John? So some people think that maybe John the apostle wrote the gospel, but this John the elder wrote the epistles as well as maybe the book of Revelation. Okay. Some other people propose maybe we don't even know who is this John, a totally unknown John, not the disciple of Jesus, nor the John the elder who wrote the epistles, a totally different John. So you find that today, if you glance some of the more modern commentaries, you may be surprised to find that they don't hold this traditional view. They probably just say it's an unknown John. We do not know really who is this John. Okay. So tradition, as I say, is that it is John the apostle. So we can say we can hold on to this view, and we don't have hard evidence to prove or disprove. So only thing is KIV until we go to heaven and then ask, will the John who wrote Revelation please stand up? Then maybe we'll find out who is that real John. Okay. So I personally think that it is the same John who wrote all, although there are even people today who think that even John's gospel is not written by the apostle. Okay. It's not a new view. That view has been around since the 60s. People like Raymond Brown, a Catholic New Testament scholar, argues that Gospel of John was written in 2nd century AD, not 1st century. It is a 2nd generation community that has survived the persecutions, and they're trying to live life without the original apostles around. So it's a 2nd generation community. So that way has been around for quite some time. Okay, but as I say, I personally think that it is still John, the one who wrote all 3. So when we look at chapter 1, he doesn't use the word elder. He says, John, your brother. So in Greek will be adelphos. Okay. I, your brother, who share with you in Jesus the persecution and the kingdom and the patient endurance, was on an island called Patmos because of the word of God and the testimony of Jesus. So this John, he doesn't use the word elect, doesn't use the word elder, okay, as we find in 2nd and 3rd John. He called himself brother. Okay. So I think here is to identify himself as a fellow brother in the suffering and the persecution of the church. Using the word adelphos, the idea of brethren. Okay. Christians eventually use the word brother or to use it with this instance of brethren. Brethren simply means even though I am not related to you, we are all still brothers and sisters in Christ, that idea of brethren. So I think it is probably used in that sense. I, John, your brethren, shares with you in the suffering and all this. Okay. So it doesn't give us any clue who he is. We have one text from the 3rd century AD from Eusebius. Eusebius is a very famous church historian. He was also the bishop of Caesarea, and he was also a Christian apologist. He wrote around the 3rd century, around 380, 390, and he wrote a series of books. And he mentioned this. He says, it would have been declared by him who saw the revelation, talking about this author John, for it is not long since it was seen, but almost in our own generation, at the close of Domitian's age. That means this John lived in the time of the Emperor Domitian. And the Emperor Domitian was an emperor who lived around, who reigned around 80 to 94 AD. Okay. And he was noted to be one of the emperors who persecuted the Christians. So by putting the name of Domitian, Eusebius is dating that Revelation was written in this period of time. So therefore, around the 90, and ties in therefore with the traditional view that John wrote it in his old age. He was an old man, and around the 90s AD. So he's hinting therefore the author is the same disciple John, who he says was not very long ago. He's about 200 years down the road from the first line of apostles. So he says it wasn't long ago, okay, since John wrote this episode at the time of Domitian. So he is as close as he can get to the original apostles 200 years after John. And so he's telling us that it is the same person who wrote it in the time of the thing. So I take it to mean that it is John who wrote it. Now, John may be the one who wrote it, but he's not actually the author in a sense. He's only the receiver of the revelation. God is actually the author of the book, because it is a message from God through John. Okay, he receives the revelation and he is passing on. So here is this famous picture from a manuscript called Saint Xavier Vitus. It comes around the 11th century and is in France. This panel, this picture, Saint John received his revelation. So notice it is God. Okay. God who gives the revelation to the angel, probably Gabriel, and the angel Gabriel gives it to John, you see. So John is not the author. John is only the receiver of the revelation, okay, through the angelic being to John, the human recipient, and John will then give it to the others. Okay, so this picture tells us that John is the receiver. Okay, and he was on the island of Patmos. So Patmos is here, off the coast of Turkey. So this side is Greece, and this side is Turkey. And the first church you find is just somewhere here. Let me change the color of the pen to red. So the first church is here, and that is Ephesus. And after that, you find the churches are all around the area here. So John was in the Patmos, and eventually he wrote this letter and he sent it to the 7 churches. And the first church in the list is Ephesus, and then go on to Smyrna and all the others. So there's a little island, a little rock island, and it was a penal colony. The Romans sent prisoners here, and you stay in here to dig in the mines. So if you go to visit the island of Patmos, there is a cave where tradition says that that's where John lived for a few years. And in the cave, there is a part where it's carved where he kneels down to pray. And so John himself tells us it was on the Lord's Day, that means on Sunday, that he says he was in the spirit on the Lord's Day, and I heard behind me a loud voice like a trumpet saying, "Write what you see in a book and send it to the 7 churches." So he therefore received the revelation and he wrote this letter and he sent it out. So he was here in Patmos. Tradition says that John eventually was free and he went on to Ephesus, and he lived there and died as a very old man. And they say that he was so old he can't even really talk and preach. They will carry him to church on his sedan chair, and then all he could say in church was love one another, love one another. Okay. So he died in his old age. So that was John in the island of Patmos. Okay, so what is the purpose of Revelation? So we can see a few things here from chapter 1. First, it is a revelation, okay, something to reveal, and it comes from Jesus, okay, which God gave him to show to his servants the things that must soon take place. And he made it known by sending his angel. That's why Codex Severe Vitus shows that God gave it to the angel, this revelation. This angel gave it to his servant John. Okay. So John's task is to now show the others. These are the other Christians who are God's servants. The things that must soon take place. Okay, so this is one of the key words. What is the meaning of this word? Soon. See? And John says, I bear witness to the word and to the testimony of Jesus Christ and to all that he saw. Remember, revelation is something which you see. It is like a vision that is revealed to you. So it's everything he not just heard, but also see. And notice it is called also prophecy. Remember, prophecy is basically a word which means a prophet is God's mouthpiece. Therefore, prophecy is words from God, okay, spoken through his intermediary. So prophecy is not just about the future, okay, that's only one aspect. Prophecy is also about the present. And the important aspect of prophecy is it is from God through always a mediator, a mouthpiece. So Moses was made as God's mouthpiece. And so he spoke on God's behalf to Pharaoh. So that's what prophecy is. You are a mouthpiece. So he therefore writes this down, and this revelation is like a prophecy. And those who hear and those who keep are blessed. Okay, so we are the ones for the keeping. And then you have again this key word, for the time is near. In fact, two words that we will look at. The word time here is the word kairos. Not the normal word for time, which is chronos. There are two words for time in Greek, chronos and kairos. Chronos is the word that we get today, chronological. That is time as it goes second by second and it moves. Kairos is time which moves towards a purpose. Okay, so it is a very different type of time. Time that is appropriate, time that's moving towards an end. And so that is the word for kairos. So he's not talking about chronos time. That means as you're talking about counting the days as you approach nearer, not that type of chronos, but a very important time where everything, you know, if you draw a map, where everything somehow meets together, and that is the kairos moment. Everything is moving towards that kairos, that appointed time. So that is the meaning of kairos. For the kairos is near. Okay. So we will look at these two terms. So we can see the purpose. The purpose is, it is something from God, given to his angel, to his servant John. John is supposed to write it down, all that he sees, and he's supposed to convey these words as a prophecy. And we are those who hear, and we are those who keep. And the urgency can be seen in two words, soon and near. Okay, soon and near. Now look at Revelation, and you can see the focus is on Christ. Very often we tend to forget this. The focus is on Jesus, the risen Christ. Many people read Revelation and we are so focused on 666, the number. We are so focused on the seven bowls, the seven trumpets, the seven woes, seven bowls, seven trumpets, seven plagues, three woes. We are so focused on those things. Babylon, the woman in red. We forget that the focus of the letter is actually about Jesus. Not so much on those. Those are secondary. I think we need to swing back. I've been reading a book by Gorman, who wrote a book called Reading Revelation Responsibly. Very interesting word, RRR. Reading Revelation Responsibly. It means he's saying, very often we read Revelation and we don't read it with responsibility. We are treating it like a code book to look for hidden messages about the future and all this. We forget the book of Revelation is trying to get us to focus on Jesus, the risen Christ. So immediately when you look at chapter 1, after that introduction part about the purpose, what do you see in verse 4? John, to the 7 churches that are in Asia, grace to you and peace from him. Now, who is this him? That is the Christ. The greeting comes from Jesus. And this Christ is described as who is, who was, who is to come. Okay. And this is a fantastic title because you find it also in Revelation, in Hebrews chapter 13, verse 8. The one who is, who was, and who is to come. Okay. And from the 7 spirits before his throne, the 7 guardian spirits who guards the 7 churches which are being addressed. So the focus is on Christ. And from Christ, who is also the faithful witness. Okay, look at all the terms used. The faithful witness, that means the one who faithfully revealed what God's message to us when in his first coming. He is the firstborn of the dead. That's why he died and he rose, and he's the first fruit of the resurrection. And he's the ruler, the real King of kings of all the kings of the earth. Okay. And the focus is on that risen Christ. And that explains why there is a lot of emphasis on this Christ. Because when you swing down to verse 12 onwards, and there is this amazing description of a Christ that we have never encountered before. We're so used to that human Jesus, flesh and blood. But once you read 12 and you see the one who is that risen Christ is so different from the usual. Okay, this Christ is one who is now coming with the clouds. Remember Acts chapter 1? When he was taken up to heaven, he told the disciples, in the same way you see me taken up, is the same way I will return one day. I will come with the clouds. And then it is an event where every eye will see him. Some people say, if Christ comes back only over America, then how can people in Malaysia see him? I don't think he'll be just in one single place. He'll come and every eye will see him at the same time. Okay. And this Christ is the Alpha and the Omega. Okay, the A and the Omega. First and the last. The one who is and was and is to come. So you find the divine titles all merged and they're all about this risen Christ. So again, the focus is on Jesus, the one who's coming. So therefore, this message is given to those who are still alive and waiting, and who may one day see him come with the clouds. That message comes from this person. Okay? And then we now see John's task. John's task is basically as a fellow partner in the suffering. That means he is not an armchair theologian writing from safety, away from suffering while the churches in Asia Minor are suffering. No, he is one of them. He himself is suffering and he has been placed in this penal colony because of his own testimony for Jesus. So he is not someone who is not suffering. No, he is a fellow sufferer. And his task is basically to write and to convey this message to the 7 churches which are in Asia Minor. And so you see it will go from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So his task is to write what he sees. So we therefore understand Revelation as a faithful account of what John saw in heaven. He was taken up to heaven, and then in heaven he looks down back on earth. He sees these cycles of the 7 trumpets, the 7 bowls, the 7 seals, the 3 bowls, all happening. And so he's recording it back eventually into a book. And this is the message to the churches. Okay. So, as I said, this is Patmos, and the letter was sent out to the 7 churches. Now, look at the churches. This is number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. It is not by coincidence that it is in this particular order. It is in this order because if someone carries a letter from Patmos and brings it, the first church you'll come is Ephesus. And the second church you'll reach is Smyrna. The third church he will reach will be Pergamon. The fourth church will be Thyatira. And from Thyatira, the fifth church will be Sardis. The sixth church will be Philadelphia. And the last one in the circle here is Laodicea before the messenger swings back here. So exactly the pattern is here as what we will find in chapters 2 to 3. Okay. So it is not haphazard. There is a certain pattern. The pattern follows the geographical location of the 7 churches as they are found, and as someone who carries a letter, that will be how you will travel from one church to the other church. That it will be the sequence of your travel. Okay, so it makes sense that therefore when the letter is written, John has in mind, he knows if I were to write, then this will be the first church, this will be the second, the third, the fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh. So what is so different about all these 7 churches? And the question, of course, is why 7? Okay. Well, 7 is a perfect number because 1, 3, 7 are almost considered what we call perfect numbers. Numbers which are perfection and often used for God. Okay, so these numbers you find often reserved for God. So you find God is 1, the Shema. Shema Israel, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Hear, O Israel, the Lord is 1. One. For Christians, 3 is that Trinity, that perfect God the Father, God the Son, God the Holy Spirit. And of course, 7 is also a perfect number. 7 representing perfection, representing completeness. Okay, complete number. Oh, my tablet is acting up. Representing that something that is complete. Okay, so is therefore not accidental. It is 7. It is for a reason. Okay, so there are 7 churches. What you can do is you can make a table as you read chapter 2, and you can see we mark it in that sense where you can see here are what we call, the first one is what we call praises. You put it. So 6 of them churches receive praise. The only one that don't receive a praise is Laodicea, the last church. Immediately when Jesus began that in verse 15, I know your works. You're neither hot nor cold. You are neither hot nor cold, and would you be cold or hot? But because you are lukewarm, I will spit you out of the mouth. So there's no praise at all. Every church at least has some praise, except for this one church. And then the second one is the so-called that condemnation. Okay, the negative part. So sometimes you find the risen Christ will say something that is bad. So Ephesians has something there, and it says here, but I have this against you. You have abandoned the love you had at first, and then cause the church to come back to their first love. So there was a bit of criticism from the risen Christ. So this will be a good way to read the 7 churches, praises and criticism. So the first church has praises, it also has criticism. The second church, you find there's none. Okay, no criticism. So only just praise, praise, praise. Whereas most churches has a balance of both. Yes, there is praise, but there's also criticism. There's also praise and criticism. There's praise and criticism. Philadelphia is also one church where there is no criticism. They have both praises. And Laodicea is the worst. Just entirely criticism. Okay, so it is the worst church to be in. So if ever someone tell you that your church is like Laodicea, you know what that means. Entirely criticism, nothing good, all bad. Okay, but there are 2 churches which are entirely good. So I will leave my colleague, Dr. Lim Kayong to share a little bit more about this. So tomorrow's sermon, I have decided to preach on this just to show you what it is to be hearing a letter addressed to Smyrna. And why did the risen Christ praise this church? And there is nothing there also to condemn the church. And you can see the reward that will be given to a church like this. And at the end of the sermon, I want to draw 4 lessons to look at in a Malaysian context. Can the Malaysian church be like the church of Smyrna? Okay, so that is the recorded sermon for tomorrow night, tomorrow's service. Okay, so why 7? Okay, I think 7 is a good number because remember, 7 is a number to express completeness. So therefore, by picking 7, it is like saying, okay, here are 7 churches which are like a representation of the different types of churches we find in the world. A representation of good and bad churches. You have 2 which are entirely good, 1 entirely bad, and everybody else in the middle. Okay, so 2 on this side, 1 on this side, and you have 4 in the middle. Okay, so most churches are, well, good and bad in a sense, okay, unless you're entirely good or you're entirely bad. And Malcolm, who is a famous New Testament scholar, says the order is probably named in which they will be visited by a messenger starting from Patmos and traveling on a circular road around the province of Asia. That's why exactly in that order, from Patmos he goes to Ephesus, and from Ephesus to Smyrna, and then swing one round and finally will reach. And in a way, he forms like a ring. Okay? A ring of churches. 7 churches to make up that complete circle. And of course, it can be not just a ring, but it can also be a shape like a crown. The 7 churches represents the best, the worst, and the best in each one of us. Okay, so you will see how the 7 ones, each one has a different message. So Dr. Lim will share more on this. So I will not say more, but let him cover this. So what type of writing are we looking at? Okay, genre is a French word. In English, we will probably use the word form. It is not very exact, but quite close. In German, we will probably use a word like Gattung. Gattung, of course, is a word which describes the genre of what you are reading or seeing or hearing. Okay, everything has a certain form, and forms do not keep changing all the time. Because if forms keep changing all the time, we will never be able to identify anything. Okay, so French word genre, English form, German Gattung. What it means is this. Let me use an example. Okay, imagine if you go and watch a movie in the theater and you're watching, let's say, a movie like Matrix, the one that star Keanu Reeves. Okay, Matrix. If you look at the movie, you need to understand what you are looking at. Okay, because if you misunderstand the genre, then you would interpret the movie very differently. And once you interpret the movie differently, you may misinterpret the movie or end up misunderstanding the movie. So Matrix is not a historical work. It's not about history. It is not even real. It's fiction, but it is sci-fi. Okay. It's in the realm of science fiction. Right? So that means we have to look at it and say, no, it's not a real story. Okay, it is just a nice story, science fiction, talk about a world that we live in, but actually the real world is not like what we see. It's only an illusion. Okay, so you have to understand what you are seeing or reading or whatever, because if you misunderstand the form, you misinterpret. So another good example would be like the movie Forrest Gump, played by Tom Hanks. Okay. In the movie Forrest Gump, he is born and then he find that he has polio, and so he's very weak in his legs. And so he started to run. And then in that movie, as he runs, he keep on running and running, and he started running around the whole US. Okay. And then so the story is about this very unusual man who does a lot of unusual things. He ends up being a army veteran fighting in Vietnam. Then he saves one of his best friend who unfortunately lost his legs, and then they became fishermen fishing for shrimp, owning a fishing boat. Okay, and then he moves on. Then he even plays ping pong and represents the United States in China, and you see him playing ping pong diplomacy, and then you find him shaking hands with the president of the United States, Richard Nixon, and all this. Now, when you look at a movie like that, you may be tempted to think, oh, he's a real life person. There was such a man called Forrest Gump, and he was a army veteran in Vietnam. He played ping pong in China. He shook hands with it. I think not true. Yeah, it's all fiction. Okay, this is fiction because what they do is they took real picture of someone shaking hand with Nixon, but imposed the face of Tom Hanks on it. So there's no such person called Forrest Gump. Now, this type of book is called historical fiction. Historical fiction means we are writing fiction, but we are using history as the base. So there is a lot of real history, but the story of Forrest Gump is not real. The context is real. There is a Vietnam War, there is ping pong diplomacy, there's all these other things, yes. But there was no man called Forrest Gump. So this type of book, this type of history is called historical fiction. And one of the books that was eventually made in the movie and they caused so much problem for Christians, remember, was the book Da Vinci Code. That was because many people read the book and watch the movie, they didn't understand the genre of this book. The author himself, Dan Brown, says this book is also historical fiction. It is not real. It makes it look real. It takes the story of Jesus, and then he explains that perhaps Jesus married Mary Magdalene, and then became a father and had children through Mary, and then they are descendants of children till today. They're protected, and you have the Knights Templar who protects them. So it's a story, but it sounds so real, and so many people are so upset because of that. They thought the church is hiding all these facts. Now, if you misunderstand this, that's why you don't understand. See, now what is a book like Revelation? It is difficult because it has three genres. It is a letter or epistle, that's number one. It is also prophecy, because John is told that you're writing something that's prophecy. Prophecy here is not about future necessarily, but it is a word, a message from God. And this is also apocalyptic. Apocalypse. So let's look at these three, and then we can see what does it mean, okay, when we use these three terms. First is a letter. So we can see right at the beginning, chapter 1. Chapter 1 is that long letter that is being written. Okay, it's a long letter and it stretches all the way to the end. So 1 to 22, chapters 1 to 2 is that long letter that John is writing. Then at the beginning of the letter in chapter 2 and 3 is an addition of 7 short letters added to this long letter. So it's actually letters within a letter. Okay, so there are 7 churches which are then identified, and they are singled out, each one with a message. So it's therefore also addressed to 7 churches mentioned in 3. And if you look at the ancient Roman letters like written by Paul, so we have all these epistles that Paul wrote, letter to the Corinthians, letter to Rome, letter to the Galatians, Thessalonians. You compare those letters, it has the same type of pattern. There's a salutation, the greetings, the name of the sender and the recipients, and we find that also in the book of Revelation. And not only is you will find that we are told it is a circular letter. The letter is written to these 7 churches, okay, to the 7 spirit and from the 7 spirits and all this, and it's written to that 7 churches. So it's a circular letter meant to be passed around. All 7 churches read the same letter because all of them are included. And then we look at the conclusion of the book. It concludes with almost the same blessing that we find in the Pauline epistles. The grace of the Lord Jesus be with all the saints. Amen. Exactly the same. See, the grace, charis, of the kurios Jesus, and then with all the hagioi, with all the saints. Amen. Exactly like the letter. So it is a letter. So keep in mind, it is a letter, although many parts of the letter diverge and goes on to other things, but it starts off as a letter, ends as a letter. First thing. Secondly, it is also prophecy, because John is told, write down the words of this prophecy. Now, what does it mean then? If it's prophecy, that means it is intended to be read aloud in the context of Christian worship. So when the children receive the letter, they will probably take it to their worship service, and then they will say, John, our brother John, who is in Patmos, wrote us this letter, and they will read it out so that everybody listens to it. So it is hearing the words of John as a prophecy. So therefore, you read it aloud, and you're reminded many times that this is a prophecy. So in chapter 1, verse 3, blessed is he who reads aloud the words of the prophecy, and blessed are those who hear. Okay. And then you have many other references to affirm that this is a prophecy, like towards the end, at the end chapter, is a reminder that this is prophecy. And he said to me, these words are trustworthy and true. And the Lord, the God of the spirits of the prophets, has sent his angel to show his servants what must soon take place. So it is the words of the prophets. Okay. And behold, I'm coming soon. Blessed is he who keeps the words of the prophecy of this book. So these words are prophecy. So not only here, but also here in verse 10, do not seal up the words of the prophecy of this book, for the time is near. Verse 18, I want everyone who hears the words of this prophecy of this book. If anyone adds to them, God will add to him all the plagues. So this book is called prophecy. Then verse 19, if anyone takes away from the words of the book of this prophecy, God will take away his share. Now, how many times does the word prophecy pops up? One time here in 6, and then one time here, one time here, one time here. At least 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times right at the beginning and the end of the book, we are told these are prophecy. This is the word of prophecy. Now, remember, we talk about prophecy, it has always 2 aspects. It's not just entirely the future. It is future and the present. Prophecy has both aspects. So when a prophet speaks, he speaks forth in 2 ways. Okay, he either foretell, that is to speak forth. To speak forth is to just speak to the people of the time, or to foretell. So foretell is, of course, more of the future. Unfortunately, we have often tend to overemphasize the second part. The second part of the future. We often think that prophecy is about the future, like looking into a crystal ball, gazing into it, and then, trying to see what God is telling us, what will happen. That is only one part of prophecy. The other main part of prophecy is the forthtelling, speaking forth. Okay, that is also an important aspect of prophecy. So don't cabalic and think that prophecy is only about future. No, prophecy is also about the present. Today, when a pastor or preacher stands on the pulpit to preach, you are speaking forth, and that is also speaking forth God's word on behalf of God. So speaking forth and foretelling, all these are 2 aspects of a prophet. So John is speaking to his people of his time, and also to people of in the later time, the future. So keep that in mind. Revelation also has this aspect. And therefore, as I said, because we often symbolic it and we think the future one is more important, I would say no, the present one is more important. John is speaking to his people, his brothers who are suffering, and he's trying to help them to endure the suffering. Okay. Thirdly, is also apocalypse. Now, this word apocalypse comes from the Greek word apocalypsis. It's a word which means hidden or secret. So the apocalypse is the word that is in Greek, the apocalypse of Jesus Christ. That's how John, Revelation chapter 1, verse 1, how John writes at the beginning. The apocalypse of Jesus Christ. We often use the English word instead, so we tend to forget that actually this is the word in Greek. In Greek, this is the word apocalypsis of Jesus Christ. So what is Revelation then? This Revelation, therefore, is a book in which there is a message that has been hidden in the past, but now revealed. Now, it doesn't mean it is a secret message that some people think, hidden underneath all the surface that we must dig it out, like the Da Vinci Code and all this. No, it doesn't mean that. Hidden simply means it was hidden in the past. People in the past did not know about it. Like what Paul says, in the past, people didn't know about the coming of Jesus, but now in the present, God has revealed it in his time. But now it is revealed. Okay. So it's hidden in the past, but it's now revealed. So Revelation is actually a type of literature which reveals things. And there is a large body of similar books written. They are not in our Bible, most of them, except for Daniel in the Old Testament. Many of these books are outside our Bible because we don't accept them as authoritative. But the Jews and even Christians wrote a lot of apocalyptic literature, literature that purports to reveal what was hidden. They reveal or disclose otherwise hidden things. And so the person who writes this one is the author is often called the seer, because the seer is the one who sees. Okay. Like the prophet Samuel is often also called the seer. And so when the father of Saul lost his donkeys, he asked his son, go and look for the prophet Samuel, because he's the seer and he can see. See, he can see where are the lost donkeys. So the seer is the one that sees into the future. So John is often called the seer because he's now revealing what is otherwise hidden. And in that message, he uses a lot of numbers. That's why there's a fascination with numbers in Revelation and a fascination with imageries. So there are many other similar books written around this period of time. This is the fermentive period where a lot of this literature of this type was being written. Okay. So Daniel in the Old Testament is like the first of his kind that came, and then after that, the Jews continued to write other similar apocalyptic books like First Enoch. We don't have it in our Bible, in our Old Testament. Okay. First Enoch talks about so-called that man Enoch who lived in the time of Genesis, who did not die, but God took him to heaven. So someone decided to write a book. Then what did Enoch see? Okay, when he went to heaven. So First Enoch that therefore tells you what this man saw. Okay, so we have all these books, Fourth Ezra, Second Baruch. Basically, Judaism and Christianity, when they were under stress, under oppression, like in the time of 200, it was the Greeks, the Hellenistic Greeks who were controlling Judea, and they were oppressing, and that's why we had the Maccabean revolt. And the Jewish people then wrote some of these books. The Christians under persecution from the Romans. Okay, so they also wrote apocalyptic books. That's why Judaism, Christian under stress, when they're oppressed, they turn to writing apocalyptic. Now, one of the reasons is very simple. When they write apocalyptic, they use the numbers and imagery. If you don't know how to interpret them, you cannot interpret their message. So like, for example, the poor Romans, even if you intercept a letter of John, they have no idea how to interpret these numbers, 12, 24, 144, 1,000, 7. because these are Jewish way of understanding numbers. And then the imageries, the animals and all the beasts and all this, like Daniel uses all this. The first like a bear, second like a leopard, third like an eagle. All these imageries, unless you understand what they mean, if not, you can't interpret. That's why they were able, therefore, to write a message in which the oppressing regimes, Roman or Greek, could not read. If you don't understand how to interpret, you are lost. Okay. So when you can see now, this is the sweep of this type of book. It uses a letter, and then as it starts off the letter, this letter tells us it's a message from the risen Christ, who is exalted and glorious. He's addressing the message as one long letter, subdivided into 7 churches in 7 cities in Asia Minor, 7 representatives. The number 7 immediately to end the Christian number for completeness. So it is a number of perfection, completeness. Therefore, it is a very significant number. That means it stands for all churches, a complete number. That means we don't need to describe many churches. Just use 7. 7 is like a number which represents all. And then in that open vision now, John tells us, I got this vision because God opened the window and I was taken up into heaven, and there I saw all these things happen. So John describes that when he was taken up, he saw a huge crowd. There was a huge crowd of people. Who did John see? Remember, in heaven, there's no more time. Time ceased to exist in heaven. On earth, time still goes on. I think what John saw was all God's people in heaven when time is already over. That means when the end has already happened, he's taken up there and he sees all this huge crowd that is there, and then he sees this round the throne, 24 thrones for 24 elders, and then there were 4 living creatures flying around, crying the tri-holy, holy, holy, holy. And then and all God's people, they are all honoring God. Okay, so chapter 5, verse 11. And I looked and I heard around the throne and the living creatures and the elders the voice of many angels, numbering myriads of myriads and thousands of thousands. Okay. And then I heard every creature in earth and heaven and under the earth and in the sea and all saying, to him who sits upon the throne and to the Lamb, to all glory. So he saw everybody up there. Time has ended when they are in heaven. That means in heaven, time ends. Everything is already over. Everybody is taken up to heaven. Judgment has begun. Judgment has already taken place. And he is now up there together with all God's people, all God's elect. So you and I are probably up there in that vision that John sees. Okay. So it is a picture of heaven. Then John began to cry because he realized that no one can open that seal. Okay. There's one seal, there's a scroll with 7 seals, but no one can enter. But then a lamb steps forward. Amazing picture of this lamb, because it's not an ordinary lamb. It's a lamb that's been slain and yet alive. It has 7 horns. All lambs don't have 7 horns. Lambs don't have horns. Only goats have horns. Okay, they have 7 eyes, which are the 7 spirits. So obviously, what we are seeing is a mixed metaphor. It's a lamb, but dead, but still alive, but it has horns, 7 horns, 7 eyes. And then he opens the seals. And once the 7 seals are opened, they begin to take place. Now, as I say, how do we read the seals? Do we read them as 7 things that happen? Or do we read them as something that's happening round and round and round 7 times? See, that is the difficult part of reading this. And each time, when it comes towards the 6 and the 7, the 6 and the 7, there is like an interlude, a break in heaven, and something happens. So here's a description. Then the first to the 7 seals, the 7 seals merge into the first trumpet. So there's a bit of overlap. The 7th seal merge into the next cycle, and the next cycle is the 7 trumpets. Okay. And then again, there is an interlude between the 6 and the 7 trumpets. Okay. Then you swing, and then there is a little break here, 2 chapters of like an the interlude is very long, there's a break. Then only come back to that 7. Okay, so you have 1 to 7, and then from here 1 to 7, and then the 1 begins the next one to the 7. So now it is bowls. Okay, so from trumpets, yes, from 7 seals to 7 trumpets to 7 bowls. But the difference between this is that there is now no interlude. Okay, there is no interlude like what you find in the cycle. So the 7 seals, there was an interlude between the 6 and 7. The 7 trumpets, between the 6 and the 7, there was also an interlude. But when it comes to the bowls here, there's no interlude. It just goes straight all the way to the end. Okay. And then the destruction is there, and then there's a new millennium, the kingdom, and then the new heaven and earth, and then the final chapter, all this. Okay. So the difficult part is how to understand this. Do we understand them as 21 events? That was how some people tend to interpret it. Or do we see them as actually as the same cycle that's now repeating again? That means the 7 has now gone back to 1, which represented here. So actually what they're saying is only just 7 things only, but they're repeated as 3 times. 3 times. So it's actually only 7 things represented by the word 7, not 21. So whichever you hold would so-called affect the way you interpret the book. Okay, so we will see that in part 2 when you do that interpretation. Okay, so let's quickly look at now what you will meet when you read a book like Revelation. You have scary characters, pale green horse, who is someone who brings death. Okay, so that is a 4th seal, a pale horse, and the rider's name was Death. Hades follow after him. Then you have fantastic locusts. Okay, verse 3 to 11. When the shaft was opened, then came out all these locusts, and these locusts has a power like the power of scorpions that sting. They will not harm the grass of the field or any green growth. Instead of eating grass, which what locusts do, they instead will hit on mankind, those who don't have the seal of God upon their heads. So are we talking about real locusts, or are we talking about something that look like locusts? Now here is where we have a very interesting imagery. Okay, because you find that some people then interpret this, that these locusts, are they real or are they just a metaphor for something? So Martin Luther in the 15th century, he was living in a time when the Islamic army was coming out of Saudi Arabia and conquering, and they were entering into Europe. And thank God they did not overrun what used to be Yugoslavia. If they overrun that area, then they were entered into Europe and conquered Europe. So Martin Luther then, he read the text and he said that this is local knowledge, and especially because when you read 7, you see, when you read verse 7, you see how he fits his description. In appearance, the locusts were like horses arrayed for battle. Okay, so the Arabian army ride on these Arabian horses, very fast horses. On their heads were what looked like crowns of gold, and their faces were like human faces. Their hair like human hair, because the Arabian people wear a turban. And then when they ride on their fast horses, their turban fly in the air, so like a long hair. Their teeth were like a lion's teeth, and their scales are iron breastplate, and the noise of the wings was like the noise of many chariots, and they're like horses rushing into a battle. So these locusts, when they ride the battle, they make a lot of noise. And the Arabian people, not Arabic people, when they ride the battle, they will what we call yodel. They'll make this noise that frightens the enemy. And so Martin Luther read and said, let's see, the locusts is the Islamic army that is coming out. They're riding on the horses, and the picture fits them with their long turbans flying in the wind like the woman's hair. And then he says to make a lot of noise. Well, these are fellows who make a lot of noise when they ride into battle. And so he was convinced that this imagery was referring to the Islamic army coming out from Saudi Arabia. Now we know, well, the end of the world didn't come in his time, so therefore doesn't seem to be true, see, but he interpreted this. Martin Luther, the great reformer. Okay. So he thought that the locust was the Islamic army. Today, some people will read the same text and they will say, no, these are helicopter gunships. See, and when their wings make a lot of noise, that is the helicopter, the whirlwind. And out of their mouth, see, like they have tails as scorpions, or there is the gun that's fitted on the helicopter gunship, and then they shoot out all these bullets. Today, people interpret this as the helicopter gunships. Okay. The whirly wings make a lot of noise. So, who is right? Are we right? Martin Luther didn't turn out to be right because he argued this. How are we sure that these locusts are the helicopter gunships that we find today in our time? See? So, you see, every generation has tried to interpret it, and most of the time we have been wrong. Or you have that great red dragon, and the tail will swing down, and 1/3 of the stars will fall down. Now, what does that mean? You see, and we are still debating. What does that mean? Okay. Who's this red dragon with 7 heads trying to eat up this woman? Okay. So you have all this imagery, and then you have this beast from the sea that comes out. It is leopard-like, like the leopard, but it has 7 heads. Okay. Then there's another beast that comes out and can talk like a dragon. It has horns like a ram. And then there are these four foul spirits that come up. They are like frogs. Okay. We really struggle to try to interpret this. Okay. And you can read out some of these books written by some of these proponents, very famous people, and they all claim to be able to interpret all these things. I don't know how to interpret some of these things because they are metaphors. And then see how the book uses numbers. All these numbers are used. There are 2 olive trees with the 2 prophets. There are these 4 angels, and also the 4 living creatures at the 4 faces. The 7 comes out in the 7 spirits, the 7 stars, the 7 lampstands, 7 heads on those monsters, 7 kings that rule the earth, 7 churches, 7 angels, 7 blessings. 7 is a number that keeps milk, and especially the 7 seals, the 7 trumpets, the 7 bowls, and even the thunders. And then there were 10 horns, and out of that 10 horn comes out 1 little horn. So, like what Daniel says. So, what do they mean? You see, if you are Jew, you understand the numbers. Numbers have meanings behind them. Okay, 12 gates, 12 angels, 12 tribes, 12 foundation stones, 12 apostles, 24 elders, and then across this number 666, the mark of the beast. So some people say this is Antichrist. So they actually try to interpret that to refer to Emperor Nero. Now, unfortunately, if John is writing at the time of Domitian, 90s, it can't be Nero, okay? Because that is already, John hasn't written that letter yet. But you find the 66 that's applied all through history. Martin Luther described the Pope of his time, okay, the 15th century Pope. He was the Antichrist. And so the papal Vatican City, the papal city was Babylon. Okay, so that's how he interprets. So in all history, you find people interpret like this. So during World War I, it was Wilhelm Kaiser, the German guy who was the Antichrist. In World War II, it was Adolf Hitler. in the 1950s was Stalin and Mao Zedong. Then later it went on to Saddam Hussein and all sorts of things. So who is the Antichrist? Okay. I think the number 66 is meant to be one short from 777. 7 is a perfect number, 3 is a perfect number, 3 times completion. That is a reference to God, the idea of perfection. So 6 is a human number. 6 is often used for human. Man was made on the 6th day. Is a human number. So that means it's saying that whoever is coming, this Antichrist is human. Okay, the one who will come in the last days, will oppose God and do all these things, is human. That's why it's 3 times a human number. It's to tell us it's a human being. Okay, not an angelic being coming here. It is a human who will arise and he will lead the fight against God. In fact, John uses the plural Antichrist in his letters, okay, especially in First John, and he really talks about in Second John, he says there are already many Antichrists, plural. Okay, so it's just that every age there will be one person who will stand up against God, and so you have Antichrist for almost any generation. Then you have the 1000, which is the millennium, and the fascination of people with the 1000. When the year reached 1000 AD, there was panic in Europe because everybody read, and by the time Christianity has spread over Europe and many countries were Christian. And when it came to the year, then they realized, no, this is now the year 1000, the millennium, the new millennium. We're entering into the new millennium. We have finished year 1 to 999. That was the first millennium. See, the year 1 to 999 was the first millennium. And now we're entering into the second millennium, which is all the way to 1999. So now we have entered into this millennium, and so now we are at the point into the third millennium. So remember, this was a time when all the churches, Christians were all in turmoil, panic. Everybody thought the world would end. We have letters, we have books written from that period of time talking about the panic of the church, and everybody was wondering, will Christ return here? Well, 1000 years later, when we reached this one, 2000 AD, remember 2000 AD also had a minor panic. We all talked about the Y2K bug, and I remember, there was this fear that all our computers will stop working because our clock cannot go beyond 1999. Okay, you cannot hit the 2000, and then there were all these fears that our computers will stop, aeroplanes will then fall down from the sky, and all sorts of things. And everyone is so sure that the year 2000 was the year Christ will return. And well, nothing happened. We went through the year 2000, and we are now into 2021. See, so every time people have been speculating, and they've been proven wrong. Then there's also this number 1260 days, which is a very unique number. And then there's this number, which is so fascinating because there's even a movie, a TV series made out of it, 144,000. JWs, Jehovah's Witnesses, they claim that heaven is already filled. The 144,000 have already been booked. Now everybody else got to work their way to heaven. So the 144,000 already filled. So the rest of us are not in the 144,000. Okay, so we have to work away. I think this number is simply 12 times 12 times 1,000. And they're all round numbers, and they're all numbers about periods of time. See, 12, which is a round number, 12 times 1,000. I think it's just a symbolic number. I don't think it's an actual number. So numbers, how do we interpret numbers? You have to take a course, take a study to look at how Hebrew people understand numbers. Then you can only begin to understand the book of Revelation. And finally, we have given Jesus. The Jesus that we see in the book is so different. Remember, the book, he is the center of the book. Don't get misled by all those beasts, scary beasts, all this. No, 666, those are not the key focus. This is the focus, the risen Christ. And John gives us so much description of what he saw about this risen Christ. On one hand, you can see whenever he appears, it's either always angel like, but such difference. Okay, look at chapter 1, verse 12 onwards. And you see all the way to 19. And I turned to see the voice that was speaking to me. And on turning, I saw 7 golden lampstands. And in the midst of the lampstands, one like a son of man. Okay, son of man is used in the book of Daniel, chapter 7, verse 12. It means like a human figure. One like a son of man. He's clothed with a long robe. Okay, so there's a long robe. With a golden girdle, a golden belt around his breast. His head and his hair was white as snow. So the hair is white as snow. And his eyes were like flames of fire. So here the description make it like eyes of fire. His feet was like burnished bronze, refined as in a furnace. And his voice when he spoke was like the sound of many waters. In his right hand he held 7 stars. So there's 7 stars here. And from his mouth issued a sharp double-edged sword. Now, this is something amazing. From the mouth came out a sword. And his face was like the sun shining in full strength. That's why you see like the rays of the sun coming out. When I saw him, John says, I fell at his feet as though dead. Now that is the type of risen Christ we're talking about in the book of Revelation. So different from the human Jesus that we encounter. So different from 1 John. 1 John chapter 1, John the Apostle tells us about spending 3.5 years with that human Jesus. He says that which was from the beginning, that means that Logos, the divine Logos, which we have heard and which we have seen with our eyes and which we have looked upon and touched with our hands. He was so familiar with that human Jesus. That word of life, the Logos, became human flesh. But here is a totally different Jesus. This is the risen Christ. This is the Christ that is now in heaven, the one in glory. Or whenever he comes, he's always in a lamb shape, a lamb. Okay. So when he was confronted with when he saw there was a scroll with 7 seals, and he said, "Who is going to open?" A lamb appeared, a lamb that was slain with 7 horns and 7 eyes on them. All this. Okay, so it's a very amazing, and then it's like dead but yet alive. So Jesus appears in 2 types of imagery. One often like a son of man, angelic being, but very different from the usual one that we see, and one that's often like in the lamb. And who is this Jesus? What does he do? He no longer heals, perform miracles, open the eyes of blind, and all this, like what he did in his 3.5 years of ministry on earth. Now, in the book of Revelation, he opposes monsters, dragons, beasts, foul animals, all sorts of things. It's a different fight. Okay, a different fight from what we find him doing while he was on earth. And the whole basis of his victory, why is he able to be victorious, is because he died and rose. He died and rose. He died and rose. It's a message that is imbued into the whole book. He died and he rose, the firstborn of the dead. All this. So you find it in chapter 1, 5, 14, 19, 21, 22. Keep on reminding he can only be victorious because he died and he came back to life. Because he died, he came back to life. If he didn't die and came back to life, he would not win this victory now. And this is the Christ who is speaking to us now. He is the one who is standing among the 7 lampstands, the 7 representative churches. It means Christ is in our midst. Now remember, if we are talking about John, writing in the time of the empire-wide persecution of Domitian, the churches are suffering. And there are some churches which are also having local persecution in their own places. And yet, they are now reminded Jesus stands in their midst. They may be in a desperate situation, like in the book of Smyrna, they face opposition from the top, from the Romans. They also find opposition from the local Jewish community who are making things difficult for them, from within, from without. And here is a message to remind them Jesus stands in their midst. Okay? And he's addressing them and speaking to them. So finally, let's end with this. Just a quick glance. We'll follow this up next week. So what is the key message then? The key message is, as I say, don't get so caught up with the book of Revelation as only end times. It is about Christ understanding the church and what a church goes through, the suffering. So therefore, it's a message which can be for all times. Anytime the church is suffering, Christ is in our midst, and he understands because he himself died and came back to life. Whether we are in the church in the 1st century, or whether a church in the 3rd century before Constantine became emperor and before the church went from being persecuted to now official church, or it could be the church under suffering in the time of communist Russia, Stalin, or under Mao Zedong in communist China. Christ understands, Christ knows. Okay, and then that vision that John gave us of heaven is an amazing vision. It's a vision where we realize, hey, everything there is perfect up there. There's no more pain, no more sorrow, no more crying. And up there, all we do is praise God. All the living creatures only spend their time praising God. And they're singing new songs to the Lamb. That's what we will do in heaven. We are praising God. Heaven is so different on earth. So when the 7 churches, the people take their eyes off what they're suffering and look to heaven, to a future time beyond them. They take heart. Even if we die, it's okay. We're going to go to heaven, and heaven is an awesome place. So a better place, a better heaven is coming. So that picture of the new Jerusalem, the new earth, all this is a vision that gives us hope. Okay. Here we are, everything is bad, everything is falling apart, everything is being destroyed. Don't worry, a new heaven, a new earth is coming that will replace. Then all these visions of judgment has a purpose. They are reminding us those who are guilty will not get away. You know, evil will always be judged. Good will triumph in the end. Of course, today we find such a message. Very often people don't believe. They think that maybe one day, evil will triumph in the end, not good. No, we have this message in the book of Revelation, and we are reminded that good will triumph in the end. All evil will be judged. Okay, and the whole idea of Christ standing in our midst, always standing in the midst of the lampstand, is to remind us that God is in charge. Human history is the arena where God works. There is nothing that happens in the world without God doing and without God permitting and allowing. God is in charge of human history. The Song of Hannah, okay, is in I think 1 Samuel. After she prayed for a baby because she was barren, and finally God did hear her prayer, and so she sang this song in chapter 2. And in the song, you can see in 2 Samuel chapter 2, he says, "The Lord kills and brings to life. He brings down the Sheol and raises up. The Lord makes poor and makes rich. He brings low, he also exalts. He raises up the poor from the dust. He lifts up the needy from the ash heap. He makes them sit with princes and to inherit a seat of honor. From the pillars of the earth are the Lord's, and on them he has set the world." The whole idea is God raised up kings, God put down kings. That is the God we are talking about in the book of Revelation. So therefore, history is under God. No history is moving without God not in charge. And God will one day end human history with just judgment. That's why there will be this throne at the end of it, and there will be this judgment, a lake of fire, and all those will be thrown there. So beyond earthly persecution lies blessings. Life with God, and heaven is like feasting with the Lamb. That's why Jesus talks about that heavenly banquet where the owner sends out invitation to everyone, you know, and then everyone from the byway, highway will fill up this place, and there will be this messianic banquet in the future. So there will be what awaits us. So now we may suffer, we may lose out everything materially, we may, you know, lose our homes, our jobs, may be kicked out, in prison. Don't worry, look beyond. John tells us we have a new future waiting for us. So the message of Revelation is not to spend so much time trying to find out what is this scary creature, what is this. I think they are symbols of what will come in world history. They are symbols of evil and whatever, but the focus should be on the risen Christ, the very foundation of our faith. And you focus on that, then you understand how to respond, and then you also understand how to worship. That's why Gorman in his book talks reading Revelation responsibly. He believes that the book of Revelation is meant to help us to get our worship right, to know how to worship God now on this earth. Why should we worry? Why should we worry even when the Romans come, whether whatever enemy come, we worship this living God who is, who was, and is to come. So it's an enduring message which has endured for 2,000 years. So when will Christ comes? The near, the soon, the end, all this. Okay, so we will spend next week looking further into how we can now make use of a book like Revelation. Okay, so I've taken a bit more time, but I hope that lays a very good foundation so that you don't get so caught up when I read the book of Revelation. I want to figure out what is the difference. Those are secondary. The more important is to see the important message of the book. And what is the important message? The focus is on a risen Christ. A Christ so different from what we see. Remember that pictures, eyes like fire, like a sun bursting forth. Out of his mouth come that sword. Remember the word of God is sharper than a double-edged sword. It cuts into bone and marrow. And so what Jesus speaks, what he says will cut. So we have to interpret those imageries and see how what is the message of that picture for us. No wonder John's response, he fell down in worship. And that's what we must do when we listen to a book like Revelation. Okay, so I leave it now for Q&A.
Steve, can everybody unmute themselves if they want to speak?
Yes, already said.
Steve there?
They can unmute. They can unmute themselves.
Okay, so.
But one by one, don't everyone speak.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
All right.
Dr. Lim will share more.
So, any questions?
Okay. So next week I will cover how do we interpret a book like Revelation, the 4 usual ways, and I'll show you if you take this way, then how do you read certain chapters and all this. That will show you how you, because I really cannot tell you how to read a book like Revelation. It all depends on your underlying presupposition. Okay. So, but I will explain all this. Then you can say, okay, maybe you hold this view, and that's how you will read the book of Revelation. So I hold a more a combination view of preterist and future. So that is my position. So I will just tell you what are the 4, and then you have to make up your mind. How will you go about? Because once you understand this, then next time when you read a book, like let's say by John Welwood, Hale Lindsay, and all these people, you immediately can say, this guy holds this out view. That's why you interpret the book like this. Okay, so that will be a useful key to unlocking each person who write a book. Then you know where they're coming from and why they interpret a passage like this. Okay, questions?
Can I start off?
Sure.
Is it safe to say that the people who received the letter could understand it perfectly?
I wouldn't say perfectly. They will understand it definitely more than us because they were in the time of the first century. Many of them were formerly Jews as well, so they will be familiar with the imagery and numbers. And they are people who are living out the persecution. So when a letter like this comes to them, they understand immediately. And also because they live closer to that time and imageries like this were used, as I said, if you don't have the key to unlock, you find it difficult. For example, look at Daniel. Daniel talks about the 4 kingdoms. And you will find no two persons agreeing entirely how to interpret the statue of what Nebuchadnezzar saw. Head of gold is interpreted for us because Daniel says, "You king, you are the head of gold, Babylon." But after that comes what? Is it after that comes Medes, then followed by Persian, and then followed by Greeks? Then you have 4. Or is it followed by Medes hyphen Persian combined kingdom? Then followed by the Greeks, and then you end with the Romans as a 4th. You see, each one interprets differently, and you end up with a different scheme. Then when you talk about the 4 beasts that come out from the sea one by one is like a bear that is slanted, and then he got 3 ribs in his mouth. You know, how do you interpret something like this? Now, maybe people at that time living then, they were familiar with certain imagery. For example, the imagery of a leopard was on the insignia of a war banner of one of those kingdoms. Fast as a leopard, swift like a leopard. So when you talk about leopard, immediately people know that refers to one empire. Now we don't know unless you read out. So because we don't understand, then we have a bit of difficulty. It's like somebody wrote all these things and then didn't leave behind a key for us. Bear stands for this, leopard stands for this. You know, if we have a key like that, so easy. I used to play this game with my students. You know, even today, modern countries, we use one animal to stand for it. Okay, so what does a bald eagle represent? Which nation does a bald eagle? Very easy. Most of us know.
US.
US, America. Okay, so then when we use a bear, what nation does a bear represent?
Russia.
Russia. Now, when it comes to a question like, what animal is Great Britain? Then my students start to fumble. What do you think is the animal for Great Britain? See, either you know or you don't know. If you don't know, then you're stuck. And like reading a book of Revelation and Daniel, many of these imageries, we don't have a key. We have lost the key to interpret. So Great Britain actually is the bulldog. British bulldog. See? France, cockerel. Le coq sportif. You see? So either you know or you don't know. In the same way here, when John uses all this imagery to describe, either you know or you don't know. Now, why does he use imagery to explain? That's because remember, apocalyptic literature uses these things. So that when someone else who don't understand read this and cannot faham, you read only on the surface. If you understand and not, you read a lower level meaning behind it. It is like in the first century, Christians shake hands with one another. They draw a fish on their palm of their hands and they shake hands. Then when I see the picture of a fish, I know what you are. Not fisherman, Christ, Christian. Because the word fish in Greek is ishtush. So let me type it out on the chat. And is an anagram. Okay. So ICHTU. Ishtush. Okay. So ishtush is a Greek word for fish. So they use a symbol for fish. But you can see the I represents Jesus. Okay. The CH represents Christos, Christ. The TH represents Theos, that is God. I'm typing out so you can see the word. Then the U is Huios, which is the word for son. And then the S is Zotter, which is the word for Savior. Okay, press it out. Now you can see. So Istush comes from I, the word for Jesus, CH, Christos, Christ, so Jesus Christ. T is the word theos, which means God in Greek. The U is actually the a breath breathing on top of the U, huios. Huios means son. And then Zotter is Savior. So it's an anagram. ICHTHUS is Jesus Christ, Son of God, Savior. And so that anagram was a Christian anagram. So therefore, when I use that imagery of a fish, the poor Romans don't understand. They think, oh, you guys are fishermen. No, we're not fishermen. We are Christians. See? So you can hide behind an image, a number, 666. Okay. And so it reveals and yet conceals. And that is the difficult part of the book of Revelation. It reveals and conceals. It tells you, it's like this. They're like locusts with this. But what exactly are those locusts in chapter 9 of Revelation? Are they like what Martin Luther taught? Arabian armies riding on the Arabian fast horses with their turbans flying in the wind, and then all of them making noise. And then this is the locust army. Or is it today helicopter gunships spitting out fire from their guns? Or who knows, in the future it may be UFOs or whatever. See? Everybody has been trying to interpret, and so far everybody has been wrong. The world has not yet come to an end. See? So that reminds us, therefore, we have to be careful, because a lot of people think, I have done it, I have interpreted. Many people claim, no, 666 stands for who? Bill Gates, all sorts of count. Now, why is it not Bill Gates? Very simple. The argument is, if the number 666 is actually a number of a name of a person, and then you take your alphabet, then A is number 1, B is number 2, like that, how do you get 66? First of all, John didn't write in English. John wrote in Greek. So Bill Gates is an English name. So how do you use an English name and work backward using Greek and all this, and then say that is 66? You see how the whole thing collapses. How do you get how do you get Saddam Hussein as 666? Okay. So I don't think it's deliberate like that. It's just a number which is to remind us it's a human number. Whoever is standing up against Christ are human beings used by the devil and all this, and every generation they will be antichrist, as what John writes in his epistles. They are really antichrist among you. That's what he says. But in the end times, there will come one, maybe capital A antichrist. This the biggest antichrist of all. So every generation they have been an antichrist, whether it's Adolf Hitler, whether it's Joseph Stalin, whether it's Mao Zedong. Anyone who challenges and opposes God. That's why Babylon is actually just a cryptic name for Rome at that time. Rome stood against God because they claimed that their emperor Caesar was a god. So they actually have a statue of their emperors, and they will bring it to every town and place it there, and you're supposed to bow down and worship and offer a pinch of salt as incense as an offering to Caesar. And you proclaim Caesar is Lord, Caesar is Kurios. Now here comes a Christian and they say, no, Christ is Kurios. Jesus is Lord. So it was a challenge against empire. Okay. So by writing all this, John is able to hide his message behind imagery and numbers, so that even if the Roman authorities read a letter like that, they tak faham. They cannot interpret. They don't have the key to interpret the message. But for the people of his time who was used to this context, reading Daniel and others, they understand all this. So the imagery, I think, is more familiar to them in their time than us. Today, we are 2,000 years after this period of time. We have grown a bit more sophisticated. We know we have more things added in. Harder for us to interpret those things. Unless we have a key. Unless someone can discover a key. Someone writes a book and says, this one represents this, represent that, 24 represent this, 12 represent this. If someone have a key like that, we can unlock the whole book. But we can't. See, like Daniel, especially 1260 days. People have been struggling with this. I teach a course on cults, and a lot of cults actually claim to interpret the number 1260 and claim that it points to a year, and so they proclaim the year. JW has proclaimed second coming of Christ 5 times, and they got it all wrong. 1874 all the way to 1925, 5 times, they gave 5 years. And what they do, each time they announce, like 1910, Christ is coming again. All the poor Jehovah's Witnesses fellows, they sell up all the property, all their land, all their houses, give up everything, all dressed in white robes, all go up the mountain, all waiting for Jesus to come, and then Jesus never return. And then they come back down, and then the leader will say, oh, we miscalculated. Actually, it's 1914. And then 1914 come, they will sell out everything, give away everything because they're supposed to go to heaven. They all dressed in white robes, go up the mountain, all waiting for Jesus to return. Jesus never return. Now, if you get beaten like that, you got stung once, you still want to believe in a group like this? But it's amazing how people still stay on in a group like this. They has prophesied 5 times Christ will come, and 5 times Christ did not come. So I will caution many of us here, don't get so caught up with trying to interpret dates and all this. Remember what Jesus says? Even Jesus says the Son of Man doesn't even know the day of his coming again. Okay, so I think to me it's a waste of time trying to sit down and trying to calculate exactly what is what, this one represents this one, this represents that. You can work out an exact date. A lot of books do that, and many books have been proven wrong. My first time I came across a book like this was in 1976. I had become a Christian, and I went to Sufest in section 5 of PJ to the bookshop, and right at the counter, they put up a book written by a Singaporean professor claiming to have unlocked the key of the book of Revelation. So the title of the book is The Antichrist Review. Then colon, ... Russia. And then the picture of the book was a map of Russia with that red sickle, hammer and sickle. And I remember reading the book, fascinated. Wow, not Russia is the Antichrist, and there's all there, and then everything is happening. And then start counting the time to rapture, and they say rapture was coming 1980. I remember 1980. I was so excited. 1980 was second coming. Nothing happened. Books have been written like this. Late Great Planet Earth, all the books have been written, Salem Kurban 666, nothing has happened. So let's be careful that we don't end up being so caught up trying to interpret dates like this, but rather to focus on what is the message of the book for every generation while we are waiting. The clue is in the 2 words, coming soon and the time is near. Is not what we often think. Next week, I'll explain these 2 terms. Type K, the word soon, and near, ergus. What do these 2 words mean? They don't mean what we think in English, unfortunately. But once you understand those 2 words, then you realize, I think we have been spending so much time trying to calculate time and dates and all this. No, the book is telling us, doesn't matter when, the coming is imminent. Just learn to live and worship God and be ready. That's all. It's not, this is a timetable, find the date and get ready before Jesus comes. I think God doesn't want to give us a date. Very simple. If I know what's the day of Christ coming and it's next year, okay, this year I enjoy first. Then maybe 1 week before coming, okay, then I get serious. Then I'll get back right and then I serve God. Then last minute, I still squeeze to heaven by the skin of my teeth. I don't think God wants to give us a date like this. See? It's better not to know the exact date, but to live our life with the idea of it's always imminent, always coming. Okay, there's a question.
Any other questions?
There's a question from Adrian. I like the reminder that reading the book of Revelation is a focus on Christ. But how do we correct wrong perception of interpretation? I believe different cultural generations have different key to understanding certain imagery. Go back to historical context. Because I hold the view that it is historical, that means I look at those set of visions as it's like a template that John is telling us that in every human age, in every human time, there will be cycles of things like this where things will happen and you will go from bad to worse. But don't worry, it's not yet time yet. They're like just the pangs, they're birth pangs. And so it's like a reminder like that. So it's not like we have to find out what is the sixth trumpet or what is the fourth bowl and all this. No, I think they are repetitive. I don't look at that as 21/7, but it is 7. They are repetitive. They're just a metaphor, a template to help us to see what things will be like, so that things will go from bad to worse, from bad to worse, from bad to worse. And that pattern will just alert us, then let's just get ready. I don't think we can pinpoint exactly. For example, some people say in Revelation 8 about angel blow his trumpet, and then there was hail and fire mixed with blood, and then fell down to the earth and all this. That's why somebody made a prediction about blood moon, and that book became so popular 2 years ago. Remember blood moon prophecy? And John Hagee picked up on this idea. The moon will turn red. There are times when the moon will turn red because the sky is polluted with dust. Sometimes the moon turns red. The moon also turns red when there's an eclipse. Have you ever seen a lunar eclipse? The moon turns red. So nothing special about blood moon. Okay. So what makes it so special? Oh, maybe it gets bigger that time. Okay. But there are times when the moon gets big. There are certain seasons of year when you find the moon is very big, the moon is very small. That's different cycles. But there was a book that he wrote. I can't remember the author, but John Hagee picked it up and wrote a book on the blood moon. And it was very popular, I think 2 years ago. And even last year, people were still talking about the blood moon. And it was very popular in the US. It went around like a prophecy, and everybody was saying world was coming to an end. That's why all the conspiracy theories, QAnon came in and all talk about Judgment Day, the storm is coming. I don't hold all these conspiracy theories the way you read it. Okay? So I think they're all general images meant to tell us that things will happen in nature, on earth, and it's just telling us that persecution will go from bad to worse and all this. Because a lot of people try to interpret, there will be 2 witnesses that will come out, and then they'll preach, and then they will be killed, and then they'll come back to life. Who are these 2? Okay, has it happened? Has anybody been killed and come back to life? No, I think we'll just wait in vain if you're going to be so particular that it must be this 2 person and all this. I think, as I say, if you next the part 2, I'll explain. If you take a position like this, and then I'll show you how you interpret the book, then you'll see what is the consequence of holding a position like this. So the famous position is by all these Assemblies of God, those people who hold tribulation position, dispensationalists. They will take this position that all this are about the end times, the future, and then you read them as 21 events, and you have to therefore pick out each one and try to figure out, are we now in the time of this bowl or that trumpet? But I think to me, there's wasting a lot of time looking like these clues that will lead us to a dead end. Because I don't think it's as precise like this. There are general images like that woman, that beast in scarlet, that dragon that sweeps with a tail 1/3. What all this? Well, next week, 2 weeks from now, we will try to look at the interpretive key to interpreting some of this. Okay, so I think I don't agree with most of these AG guys who use this type of tribulation dispensation way of reading Revelation. I'm a more historic approach, looking at what John is trying to encourage the people of his time, and then sets it as a pattern for us that it can be applied to any time. So any century, these things are true to a certain extent. But the most important, remember, the whole idea is, who is this Christ? So Revelation 19, chapter 19, verse 10, and John said, and I fell down at his feet to worship him. Okay. But then the angel said, I'm only a fellow servant with you and your brethren who hold the testimony of Jesus. Worship God, for the testimony of Jesus is the spirit of prophecy. That is the one. We are so caught up, I think, with all the wrong focus on all those things. I know a lot of people spending lots of time trying to figure out a timeline generation and coming up with messages. There's one guy called Harold Camping, Camping. He made a prophecy 2 years ago, the world will end. Okay, so just Google his name, Harold. I'll type it out. He's very notorious in America. He has made some prophecies before, it has not happened, but he made one again and 2 years ago, and he's claiming that it will come, I think maybe next year. So what do you do with people like that when things don't happen? The Bible says we should stone such false prophets. But we often let them go. And then they just go around again, creating problem again, frightening people with all sorts of things. So if you can get your hand on Gorman's book, Reading Revelation Responsibly, it's a very good book. I have a copy of it, e-copy. It's a very good book. He has written one on Paul, reading Paul. I think it's a very balanced stand. I really enjoy, and I did a book review of his book and posted the book review up on academia. So if you are interested to read the book review, I can send the link to Billy and she can forward that link to you. You can read my 2-page book review of this book by Gorman. Worth buying and investing in a book like this because it helps us to see the whole focus of Revelation is on what. Okay. I think the modern people, their focus is all wrong. Their focus is just trying to find out a timetable for end times and trying to prove that we are now living in the end times. As I said, every generation has been living as if the end is near. Every generation has claimed that they are in the end times. And so far, everybody has been wrong the last 2,000 years. So how sure are we that we are the ones who will be right? 2,000 years has passed. Every generation has thought that they were living in the end times. It has not yet happened. So it's a warning to us. It's not meant to be a timetable. Revelation is not a timetable for you to work out dates and all this. That's not the focus.
So if there are no more questions, we'll call it a night. And
yep.
Thank you so much.
Start going back to read the book. Okay, if you have not read the book, you should now start reading the book because 2 weeks from now, before we meet on 21st, at least go through the book once using the structure I shared with you. And then you can see, okay, we come to this part, 4 to 5 visions of heaven, 6 to 20 visions of judgment. That will give you an idea what you're reading. And then read it, then come. Okay, then you will see what view do you actually hold when you read a book like Revelation.
Right, let's just pray before we split up from here. God, we are so grateful to you for tonight, this time that is set apart for us to think about what John wrote for our benefit. We thank you for Dr. Anthony, who has helped us open our eyes a little. We know that there is much still to understand, and we just ask for your guidance, your Holy Spirit to be our teacher.
Yes.
So Lord, be with us as we depart from here. Thank you in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you, Dr. Loke.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
And good night to all.
And everyone, thank you.
Thank you, Steve.
Thank
Good
you,
night.
Reverend. Thank you, Dr. Loke and Good night.
Good night.
Good night.